Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Zenitsu, and you're listening to the Digi Talks podcast, the show that covers various topics from news to meta developments and everything in between for the fine folks who love the Digimon trading card game. Just as a quick reminder, I do try to stream this live over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, usually Tuesday nights at around 9:30 Eastern Standard, and fear not if you ever miss that, because it's always uploaded under the YouTube channel of Zenitsu, while also being on various podcasting platforms like Spotify for your viewing and listening pleasure. So please feel free to do that social media doobly-doo thing and leave that like, rating, follow, subscribe, or whatever, depending on the platform that you're listening on. It really does help support the podcast, or at least we'd like to think it does. And then just as while I'm plugging things and shilling, I also do have a YouTube membership with YouTube membership exclusive content. Most of it is gameplay from locals at this point. So if you want to continue to support the channel more directly, that's a good way to do it as well. But today I am back with Jay Stewart, and we're going to be talking something a little bit more positive this time. I mean, there's probably going to be some critical aspect to it, but trying to be a little bit more on the positive note. We're going to be talking about budget decks and like where the meta currently is for BT21 and what does that mean as a budget player. So I guess like that's the bigger context of it, is like not just budget in general, because there's tons of cheap decks. It's just for the meta, what does budget actually entail and how much are you reasonably going to have to spend in order to have like a deck that can compete. This brings us to the question of the week. So I think we actually do have a question of the week based on last week's episode. So if you ever want to be a part of the question of the week, feel free to leave a comment down, or not a comment, the question down in the comments below, and we will read it off in next week's episode. So I know there were a couple of comments where we misspoke, and yes, we know Hexablaumon is not part of EX, or is not an actual Liberator traded card. So just putting that there.
Yeah, that's my bad. I thought because it was in the Liberator set, I thought, oh, it has to be Liberator because
It was also in
Liberator set.
Yeah, it was also in the story, and yeah, so we mistook there. But I guess the question of the week is going to be brought to you by Goatboy TM 6, or not 6, Goatboy TM 4676. Numbers are very hard to read in the correct order. But the question of the week they ask is, what do you think about Digimon reintroducing the idea of side decks? So this kind of goes off of the fact that last week we were a little bit more on the critical side because we were looking at like the EX9 and BT22 outlook and where the current meta state is. And it's an extremely high-powered state. It's very unforgiving towards a lot of like mid to low tier decks because a lot of decks, unfortunately, are playing very samey at this point. So if your deck is fulfilling a role and there's a better one for it, you're better off just playing the better one that fits that same exact role. I mean, granted, that's true for most card games and most things in general. But yeah, we were being a little bit more critical of that. So Jay Stewart, what do you think about side decks being in Digimon again?
Yeah, so I can vouch and say that I went to the Arlington, Texas. I think it was Arlington, Texas. Maybe it was Dallas, but I did go to like the DigiCon that did have introduced the side decks for the very first tournament. And that was back in BT7. So I will say side decks during that time period, it was like 10 cards and everything. If I remember correctly, there was no like additional time boosters or anything like that. Like it was still like 45 minutes kind of thing. And from what I could remember with that is, like, I had two decks. One deck that I actually played with was the Red Hybrids for the deck, and that was mostly to cover my outs and everything, like some security bombs and all that stuff. The other deck I had was Black Royal Knights, and I was actually able to use the 10 cards and, like, just change up the entire style from being a controlled, being an aggressive deck, Black Royal Knights, that it was to all of a sudden be, like, a control-focused stall the time kind of thing. So back then, I wasn't necessarily too keen on sided decks. However, I will say if they can maybe do like a 5 minute time extender and everything, so that way there is time for you to switch out your cards and maybe take a little bit to think about what you want to swap in. I think there is times where because it does seem like a lot of decks aren't able to really have the outs into the main deck itself. So, and based on the format, like if you see the matchup that you probably shouldn't, you don't want to see against, that way you have a side deck that maybe has the floodgates or even has like a couple of removal option cards or something that could possibly get you out of the situation a little bit better. I think this, like where the meta is, I think side decks could, in theory, it would have to be some testing, but I could possibly see some side decks be into the thing to try to help fix what's going on with the meta, I think.
I'm in the complete opposite end of the spectrum. I think side decks, for the way Digimon is designed, how we build and play our decks, side decks will do nothing but actually destroy the entirety of the game, because you get decks, let's just say, like Imperial Dramon, where the level 6s don't matter. Like, literally, the level 6s do not matter. So, like, yes, you could fix your matchups to basically play an entirely different deck, again, depending on how many cards are allowed in the sideboard, and like that's going to fix your outs to specific matchups based on the level 6s that are going to be required. But the catch-22 is, does a deck like Imperial Dramon need even better matchup spread data because now it could swap out its level 6s to be properly teched for actually everything versus teching for as many things as it possibly can with as few cards as it can run? So you're just giving a deck like that more accessibility to be able to run more answers, and it's already one of the most oppressive decks in the entire game. Same thing with like Galaxy Engine, same thing with Dog Engine, like these engine style decks where the level 6s just do not functionally matter. That's where side decking becomes extremely dangerous. And then the other aspect of side decking is you also get decks that are really hyper insular, where they just actually can't run a sideboard because they don't have the card pool that'll allow them to run a sideboard. So it's just like, what are they going to do? Run a couple of like generic floodgates and then make their deck generally worse, which is why they're not playing those general floodgates to begin with. So it's just like, look at the family decks as an example. It's like, there's one way to build the deck. There's almost zero room for any outside, like, tech or spice to be able to enact its overall game plan. And, like, it's just super insular. It doesn't work with other cards. It puts those general decks, like the more generic your deck can be, hyper in favor of like anything that's actually trying to be insular. So like Heroes doesn't really have a whole lot of tech to really shake itself up, and it's probably like the tech would be, again, just like in any other engine deck, just swapping out the level 6s based on the matchup. And it's just like, then we're just essentially just running entirely different decks with the same engine. And like, that's where things get a little bit tricky when it comes to actually balancing for a competitive aspect, is like, how are sideboards implemented, how many cards are allowed, and then you also need to start designing decks around the fact that sideboards are included, which Digimon as of right now currently is not. So just implementing it is a very grave mistake, and I think like maybe the caveat is, one, in order to make sideboards work, they need to change their design philosophy on how decks are designed. And then two, they also need to change up how sets are designed. And by that, I mean probably have some sort of rotation implemented, so that way it actually can have more room to breathe for the decks that are in the rotation. And then the third big thing is they need to design not only decks to be more generic, but cards to be more like general. Like it favors games that are more generalized than games that are more specific. And Digimon, unfortunately, is a game that's more specific, which is why we haven't seen any other alternative formats in the game, is because the rule set of Digimon does not allow for other formats to exist outside of what Yu-Gi-Oh! Does with time-stamped formats, where it's just like, oh yeah, there's Goat, there's Edison. These are just two time snaps into the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! And Digimon is perfect for that type of alternative format. But again, like then that doesn't allow for sideboarding, and it's just a whole mess. I still firmly say no on sideboarding. Digimon cannot handle it as a game.
Yeah, no, I could definitely understand the reason, especially when you pointed out that just because the bad decks get tools that could help them, that also means the good decks get tools that they could use. Kind of
Right.
like just like the generic engines and everything. Just because, what's the word I'm looking for here? When it comes to like purple and everything, yeah, like there might be some uh, like bad purple decks that could use the dog engine to make themselves better, but the like the Viamon or Lord Naimon, they've clearly shown they could use the tools just as well, and if not, do it better.
Yeah, like it's
So I
still
understand
a
that logic.
yeah, it's still a rich get richer, the poor stay poor, but the poor looks less poor as a result. Like it's a very poor logical fallacy that Digimon unfortunately loves designing for. Because we've seen that with the option, like a lot of the delayed based options, where it's just like, yeah, it's cool that we get like Garnet, memory boost, scrambles, and all this stuff. But again, the rich get richer and the poor stay poor. The poor are now just able to attempt to try to catch up. And I'm using the word attempt very loosely. That's the question of the week. And I guess this can go into the news portion. So I know this isn't really Digimon news, but speaking of Yu-Gi-Oh! And timestamp formats, I think Digimon would be really, as I kind of already just said, really good for timestamp formats. And I think like probably timestamp. My caveat is timestamp formats with a slightly altered rule set compared to whence we originally had it. So like that's the big contention between Yu-Gi-Oh's like recent change was the fact that they are trying to implement um the current rule set for older cards in older formats. So they're retroactively changing how those older formats played to confine to the newer rule set. So that way, in Yu-Gi-Oh's logic or Konami logic, they can transfer to the main game a little bit easier. Because, and for judges too, it's all one rule set. It's just what cards are legal. And like I think for Digimon that works a little bit better because of just how egregiously poorly thought out and designed some of the cards were. So like going into let's just say BT 13 format using our current ban and restriction list, I think that works. Like that's still fine. Like if anything it makes that format a little bit more interesting because we have more restrictions that we wish we had back then in play to change up the format.
Yeah, because that definitely changes up like Mirage. Numemon wasn't even a thing, so
Yeah.
Numemon wouldn't even have, and it would have forced players like to play a different type of blue deck, or even just change the play style of the Mirage and everything.
And
Because even back in PT13, we were talking about how Mirage was like kind of like a problem-ish back then.
yeah, and obviously promos is another point of contention where we also got promos like way later than when we reasonably should have. So we could retroactively change promo legality to be able to fit with that type of timestamp format as well because I think at the time like some of the promos that came out in like BT14 in their update pack should have came out for our BT13 but didn't, so we missed those opportunities to use those cards for the decks that they were meant to. And yeah, it's that type of thought process where it's just like that could actually make for a pretty interesting timestamp format that can change and conform to more modern rules rather than just be this is reliving BT13 as is. But I do think like we're at a point where, just like in Yu-Gi-Oh, the game has been power spiked to a point where probably having an alternative format is actually going to be good and healthy for the game, more so than what Bandai's half-assed trying with their what is it? Ultimate Cups? No, not Ultimate Cups. Ultimate Cups kind of do it, but the regulation
Store,
battles. Yeah.
yeah,
Like, I think regulation battles is a very bad way of doing it. It's interesting, but it's not something like, it's still very clear that Bandai's still trying to search for a good alternative format, and they're failing spectacularly at doing everything but the easiest answer, which is just copying somebody else's homework.
yeah. Because I will say, like, one of the promos you were talking about that we didn't get that we should have was the Saber Dramon. Because Japan, they had Saber Dramon, and it didn't make Ravemon like top tier or anything, but it did help since it was avian and bird trait and everything.
Right, and same thing with all of the other cards, like that came along with that. So I don't remember exactly all of them, but I think like Seedramon was a part of it, and Destromon, and just, just good cards in general.
Because like I know there's because like there is definitely a lot of older cards that kind of just like if you're a collector and everything, they're kind of just sitting there collecting dust and everything. Like there's so many cards that I have that are like, man, I've now finally gotten them, but they're not good anymore. So it's like just kind of what's the word I'm looking for here? Just sitting here like, why did I even bother getting these cards if I can't even play with them because they're way too out of format or they're not even good anymore, kind of thing. It's like you
Yeah.
could like if stores are even holding on to it, or if there's even like on TCG Player, because most of the time a lot of older booster boxes tend to go down in price and everything. So like if there's new players that are trying to like say if they did like a thing where it was like BT13 and lower cards and then promo sets of whichever that Saber Dramon was from.
Yeah, it's
Like
like
if those were
promos
all like
109 or 120 and below, something like that.
yeah, because like if they had done that and everything, I mean, if they do that for like a registration, whatever it is, kind of thing, that could cause a lot of new players to go and buy the new cards or everything, or even hit up a lot of the veteran players that are like, "Hey, can I get these cards from you?" and everything. Like all of a sudden, these older cards now have value for this,
Right. And I think
and it
like
could even be a
that's the interesting part
uh,
of timestamp formats is like it just gives you the access to be able to turn cards we're no longer using into something that's actually usable. Whether it is actually adopting more modern rule sets, or just forming a custom one for that format to try to fix the format in post.
well, even another thing too is like if we went back to BT13, that could be a great time period for newer players to even try to learn the game then because it's a I will say I would think that BT13 was a lot simpler uh, game style, gameplay, and everything for people to try to learn versus nowadays kind of thing.
So the funny thing is you say that because I would insert a meta report transition here, but unfortunately we don't have any new metadata. There's going to be an event this weekend. Unfortunately, I can't go because it, even though it is an online event, it was sold out months ago. On top of the fact that it's my work weekend and we're short staffed, so I literally can't take any of my weekends off like I could in the past. So yeah, I just physically can't even play competitively, even if I wanted to try, which is unfortunate, but that's my circumstances. So we'll get more metadata next week, but in terms of like where this meta has developed, um, it really has gotten to a point where we kind of just know what the meta is, and it's centered around four key decks. And it's not like these decks are very complicated to play. So, like, if anything, Digimon got simpler because of just how the meta dynamic shaped up is probably the nicest way that I'm going to be putting it. Because I do have two videos, probably eventually going to be a third one, talking about just the current dynamic of the game. And like I think the game is not very hard to learn. You learn your combo, and you learn what matchups you lose against, and then nothing else in the entire game actually matters. You just figure out how to get to your combo, do combo, win game. Like that's it for probably a good portion of the decks. I don't think it's very complicated of a game to play, which is like different than Yu-Gi-Oh, because Yu-Gi-Oh, there's so much nuances to the combo structures because they are so long and wordy versus Digimon where it's a lot more streamlined. So like even though we are getting into heavy levels of combo play, Digimon is a simpler overall game to understand, pick up, and play as far as what these combos are doing and how they operate. But yes, to your point, it would be easier for them to learn a BT13 format than it would be to learn this just from a matchup spread perspective. And because in BT13, there's more data to go off of to at least have a better idea of what's going on.
Well, I was even thinking more of the fact that there's a little bit more back and forth, so to say, because
That's why I picked
when I went,
BT13. Like, I hold BT13 to be basically the end of the golden age of Digimon when it came to how the game was, how we're actually playing
this
the
time,
game. Yeah.
yeah, because like the one when I went to locals and everything, where I played when I was playing Galactic and everything, I was playing against a newer player that practically was playing for the most part Rosemon, BT13 ish kind of deck and everything, and the amount of times that I kind of it was just like the fact that they really had no chance to come back and everything. There was no way for them to try to strategize or think and everything when I was playing against them, especially when I like wiped all their security checks in like by turn 3 and everything, and it wasn't even from one attack. It was from one option card that said, "I just remove your security until you have one card," and they just kind of had to stop and look like, "How is this a thing? Like, how is this a card?"
Yeah, cards like Ragnarok Cannon don't exactly scream I'm very it's not like it's not new user friendly. It just doesn't it's not an inviting card. That's the best word. It's not inviting. It's just like, oh, cards like McGeedramon plus Gravity Crush, like that whole structure on how the deck was crafted does not exuberate excitement to play the game. And I think like that's the big portion that I'm struggling with as a content creator because I'm all about accessibility. Like I want people to play the game of Digimon. Spoiler alert. I know, crazy, right? Being critical and wanting the best for the game that I enjoy. Imagine that. People think I'm overly negative and it's not overly negative. Again, I ramble about this all the time. It's overly critical. But going back to the inviting part, a card like Ragnarok Cannon does not scream, I want to play Digimon. It screams, like you said, why is this the thing? I don't really feel like it's fair. And that's because it's not fair. It's not honest. And just spoiler alert, this is probably going to come out before my honesty video. I am going to be making a video on what defines an honest Digimon deck. And, like, I think you'd be shocked to learn just from how I kind of explain that, how many Digimon decks are designed to be unfair. And usually when they're unfair, that's not inviting and that's not exciting for new players to want to pick up and play the game, even if it's simple to learn. That's my big takeaway. But if anyone, just meta perspective, if anyone just wants to know where this meta is, if you want to play a control deck, play Royal Knights. If you want to play an OTK deck, play Megidramon. If you want to play a good mid-range deck, play like basically if you want to play good mid-range slash Floodgate deck, play either Sukuyamon or Imperial Dramon, and then that covers the entire spectrum of the entire game. Like, as unfortunate as that is to say, it covers almost the entire spectrum. Like, I guess you could say if you really want to play, like, a different style of aggro deck, play something like Adventure, sure. But Adventure plays similarly to Royal Knights, not, like, entirely similarly, but conceptually similarly. Just more aggressive than Royal Knights. So, Yeah, that, and if you want to play like a good anti-meta slash control deck, more specifically play Galacti, and like that's it. There's your whole meta spread. And I'm not even saying Adventures is like very high up there, because Adventures does have its polarizing matchups based on what it tends to see. But yeah, there's very little reason to run anything but those like 4, 5, maybe 6 decks. It's very unfortunate, and everything else is just a different flavor of what those decks are already doing, which is why everyone's leaning towards those 4, 5, 6 decks to begin with. So there's your meta report. That's what we're gonna say on the meta. Now we could actually start being positive and talking about budget decks. So obviously, I don't know if you took a look at some of the card prices, but some of them are kind of ballooning to not be a very welcoming price tag, I'll say.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of decks out there. Like, take the Sakuyamon for example. Like, you want to play the Sakuyamon, well, you have to get the Ruin modes in. As far as my knowledge, the Ruin modes are still like at the $50 price range even after the reprints and everything.
Yes.
And I think you need to run 2 minimum for the Sakuya deck.
Bare minimum, yes.
Yeah, and then like Pyldramon would be at first you would think would be a budget friendly deck, but the uh what's the level 5 called again? Shoot, I'm drawing
Pyldramon.
a blank for some reason. Oh,
The Pyldramon
yeah, like
deck, Pyldramon. Yes.
yeah, my bad. Sorry, just kind of brain fart there.
No,
But
you're good.
like like the Pyldramon deck, like the BT16 Pyldramon, because of the fact that a lot of stores didn't order BT16 because they were going off of RB01 and BT15 sales, they were thinking, oh, it's not going to sell. Unfortunately, that's cards. It's not short printed, so to say, but there's not a crazy amount out there, so to say. So it's like what, a 20, if not $30 SR,
Yeah, that you need 4 of
and
for your
you
deck.
have to, yeah, have 4.
Yeah, and if you're playing a good Imperial, you're also running Hexablow at least at 2 copies, and he's like $30 a copy. So you're already looking at 180 before you even build the rest of the deck.
Yeah, exactly.
Sakuyamon's money cards, I believe, is in Pause plugin. The options like training and scramble, and then ruin mode is like the other really expensive card. Everything else is really cheap, but the fact that like ruin mode is that expensive, uh, doesn't necessarily welcome players to just privy themselves to picking up the deck. Valderarm's not terribly expensive, but he does add to it. So, like, if I had to price out Sakuyamon and just guess on a number, it's probably about a 150 to maybe $200 deck. Um,
Probably 200.
it's somewhere in that range, which for a competitive game, that's like normal. It's not terrible. It's not god awful. That's not the point that we're trying to make. The point that we're trying to make is if you are a newer player or a returning player just wanting to get into the game and pick something up, this is probably not exactly what you're willing to want to see. Is I'm going to have to spend, let's just say, $200 to be able, $200 or more, realistically $150 or more, to be able to build a competitive deck. And that's just to compete. Anything lower than that is probably going to like not necessarily be worth the investment, which is the unfortunate part, because if you're trying to cover a deck that's doing something similar to this, let's just say like puppets, um, there's no reason to play puppets. Like, because Sakuyamon exists, there's no reason to play puppets, which is unfortunate. But puppets is also really expensive because it has a like $20 to $30 SR that you need 4 of as well. Even though it does have a starter deck, it also has expensive promos. So it's like, even from a money perspective, playing a lesser deck will sometimes just cost you more than a competitive deck, which is mind-boggling. And the price of competitive decks has only gone up.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, it's definitely been the cards have definitely been going up and everything. Because like, what is it, back in BT1, we had like Magna Angemon that was like what, a $40 SR and everything back in its time. And you know, obviously after RB01, the reprint, it kind of now just became like a stupid cheap card. But now we're kind of starting to get back up into the higher and higher price tag cards and everything that could desperately use a reprint. Just unfortunately, either the reprints come in way too far down the road, or there's no kind of news or update about potential pre like re-releases or reprints of the cards,
Yeah.
so to say.
Oh, I had no idea Pause Plugin was like $15. Oop.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's like another card that could desperately use a reprint. And
Uh,
correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't Sakuyamon also use like X antibody protoform
no.
or no? No,
No.
okay, my bad. For some reason I thought it did.
Cause let me look at the Sakuya. I think the Sakuyamon it could use it, but you're only using Sakuyamon X antibody. Um, realistically, when you already have Sakuyamon, because you're using the other two Sakuyamons as really good protection and consistency. So it's like, oh, when Sakuya X lines up, then it's insane, but it doesn't need to do that. But the reason why I like compare it to puppets is because like Sakuyamon, for being a floodgate deck, also spawns lots of tokens. So like if that's an aspect of the game that you enjoy, then there is no reason to play puppets when Sakuyamon does the same thing essentially, but better.
Yeah, even like wanting to play Diaboromon and everything. No point if like you want to play a token generating deck, might as well just play Sakuyamon.
Right. Especially if you're also trying to be like hyper oppressive, because like Shine Greymon Rune mode is just an insanely batshit crazy card, and same thing with like Chaosmon Folder Arm. So it's like, okay, I get it. There's they're just insane. So, but yeah, enough I guess bashing, gush bashing on Sakuya. Sakuya was just a good example. Like there's a lot of other like going back to the top 5 competitive decks. You look at something like Megidramon, and they're using the promo Gallantmon that's like $25 a card, and then they're using the old Gallantmon, which he's like $5 to $10 a card. Um, then you have
Gigimon, $10 card.
yeah, Gigimon's a $10 promo. And like all of this stuff like slowly adds up over time. Because you also have like some of the old Guilmon and Guilmon X stuff that also isn't necessarily cheap for commons and uncommons either, because people were buying it up en masse because of how cheap it once was. But if you're getting into it now, you already missed that hype bubble, and now you're paying a little bit more for what the card actually is.
Yeah,
So,
because like because example I was gonna have for a nice friendly budget deck for the most part, depending on how you want to define budget. Because to me, it's like anything that's like 150 is like a budget deck, especially when it comes from me playing Yu-Gi-Oh. You had to spend like minimum $500 to play any deck or like the meta. But
so
to
for
me, I was thinking like
oh, go
I was
ahead.
thinking 500, 150 for budget, so to say.
I I'm constituting budget as under 100. Realistically, I would want to say under $50, but that at this point is like borderline unrealistic, just because of how many like staples you need to buy for the deck in order to make it think about functioning to begin with. And I'm talking about like the scrambles, the trainings, the memory boosts, like the combination between all of those already sets the bar of the deck above what I reasonably would want for a budget deck, which is unfortunate on how much you're forced to run those cards. Because like you look at
Yeah,
Sukuyamon, it runs them. You look at Megidramon, it runs them. Royal Knights doesn't run them, but Royal Knights is just fucked up in terms of its price because of how many SRs and secrets that you need in order to run that deck. And then on top of it, its SRs and secrets are still kind of expensive. So like you have Gallantmon Crimson Mode, which is like a $20 to $30 card. You have Omnimon X Antibody, which is a $30 to $50 card. You have Omnimon, which is around a $20 card. And these are generally like 2 to 4 ofs. So it's just like, oh, That's already well over $200 in just like 3 cards alone. That's not even including Medieval Gallantmon, the Gallantmon promo that I already mentioned. Like, it's running a lot of very expensive cards, all mishmashed into one deck. And then let's not even get into the King Drazel, which its price has been spiking up because of the increased in popularity of Royal Knights because of how much better it got.
Yeah, because
So
like a deck I was gonna give an example as a budget friendly, but after looking into it, it may not because of the fact of the older cards. The budget deck I was thinking of originally at first was gonna say was Galacticmon. Now, here's my reason before you kind of might say that it's not budget. Like, yes, the promo Destromon is like a $30 card and everything, and it's a 4 of, so you have to get like that's already $120 there. But like the SR, you only need 3 of, and it's literally like $1 card. Like everything is under $1. However, until you get to the Vemmons, the old ones from back in BT11, those are sitting at like $4 a pop now, and you need a minimum of like 12 to 16 of those. So already you're looking at another $50 there. So that to me is unfortunately a deck, like not a budget deck anymore, because of the fact that the old Vemmons are unfortunately just a little too expensive right now.
yeah, no, and that's just the unfortunate reality is like that's why I say like if your goal is to be competitive in Digimon, you're going to be shelling out anywhere between $150 to $200 bare minimum for a halfway decent competitive deck. Whether it's actually going to be tier 1 is to be determined based on the deck that you're actually purchasing, but like that's the minimum price range that I would say that you would fall under. So I would say like 100 and under I would consider a budget deck, but like my like not math brain, my value brain says, "Oh, for like 25 to $50 more, which is basically at this point one card, like the difference between adding a card or not. Um you might as well just actually play competitively. So, like, the goal of what I'm suggesting with budget is to try to find good decks that are under $100. Like, I don't want them to spend a anywhere in the triple digits for budget. Like, double digits is what I would define as budget. $50 range is like ideal, but not likely. So, like, I think like the first recommendation that I want to give is adventures because the adventures is like good and bad at the same time because if you're building it from scratch, not buying the starter decks, it's a very accessible deck because all of its pieces are dirt cheap. Like I think on TCG Player you could find decks for like $8 without the promo add-ins, which is fine because you're like for $16 or times that by 2. So for $32 you could have almost every adventure card and like you're basically almost good to go from there. And as far as adventure goes, it realistically, outside of what is in those starter decks, it's unfortunate that you do need the secret rare tie, which fluctuates between $20 and $30. But you don't need 4 of them. You need 2 of them at most. So like that's maybe another $40 of investment. So like let's just say you spent in singles $30 to get all of the adventure cards, then 2 ties. So we'll just say on the low end you got lucky. An extra $40. So you're about $70 in. And like the added adventure cards from like BT21 are like pretty much worthless. So outside of the promo, obviously. But the deck, like good versions of the deck don't run the promo, so you realistically don't need it. And I know it's getting some support in EX9, but again, not needed at all. So to have a semi competent ability to build any variation of adventures, it's definitely within the price range of what I would say is a halfway decent budget deck.
Yeah, because I'm trying to pull up one right now because I want to make sure that it actually is budget. But one I was gonna say was Galaxy Loop and everything, because for the most part, like all the main deck itself, like the Galaxy cards, like are just commons, if not rares at most. and like the SRs, like the main one you would be running is Invisimon, and right now he's saying at like 50 cents a piece,
No,
and like you
Hexablau is
could get
what makes it. I mean, but even then, Hexablaumon, if you're running two of them at $30, that's $60. And if you, like what you said, the majority of the rest of the deck is relatively cheap. Then I think like the next most expensive card outside of like the potential of running Medieval Gallant, which you don't have to do, but just in order to play that deck, I think Wistoria Memory Boost. I don't remember how much that memory boost is.
I think it's like only $1, if
It
not
should
two.
not. It should not be. It's $5.
Oh,
And usually
$5.
as a four of, so that's an extra $20. So I think like just because of that, it's pushing it a little bit out of budget range if you're playing it competitively. But if you're playing it casually, then you don't have to get like the expensive top end cards. Like you could still keep the Invisimon, but you would probably just be forced to not run Hexablau, which is partially what makes the deck as insane as it is because of how good that card is. And then you're also gonna have to not run Medieval Gallant or Gallantmon X Antibody, which are two other very strong and powerful cards. And you could run like its own native stuff, which isn't as good, but like it's serviceable. So like you could build the Galaxy deck and have at least its core and foundation for relatively cheap. It's just making it optimized and good. That's when it gets expensive.
Yeah. Here's another deck that this one definitely has kind of been way out of the format, but how do you feel about oh Jesus, the Davis deck at all with
Garbage.
the Fang Wong garbage? Okay,
So
never
like
mind
at
that.
that point, you're literally just better off playing Cross. And like I think Cross is another really good budget friendly deck because like there's a couple of different ways that you could build it. You could build it towards cross or not cross X. Shoutmon EX6, or you could build it towards some of the older stuff. So there's multiple different ways to be able to approach the deck, which makes it pretty good. And the fact that the majority of it is like actually dirt cheap is probably makes it the most budget friendly deck that actually can have a semblance of competitive success. Because like you could leverage Folder Arm if you're playing in the Shout EX 6 variant. Um, and like you're still playing into that I'm just gonna hard drop big Digimon for cheap type mentality. I think like going too far back to those insular older decks is usually not super viable. I'm just trying to see like what some of the other successful versions of Cross Hearts are. I think Blue Flares is like past his prime,
Yeah.
so that's a little bit unfortunate.
What about heroes? Because I think the most expensive card you have to get is the Gaiomon, and that's currently saying at like $13 a piece.
Um, so as long as Gaiamon stays low, Heroes slash Apps is a fine budget deck. Again, the majority, like if that's the majority of your expense, then that's like nothing. Especially compared to some of the higher end stuff. The cool thing about Heroes is if you want to be a little bit more budget friendly, you don't even need the Gaiamons because he's not a hero traded Digimon. And you could build towards Siriusmon because you're already using the Hero Tamer. So that already has that interaction that you're already looking for. And it's on trait and still removes stuff and can punch pretty hard. So like it's not terrible. And then the deck, because it's a level 5 deck where a lot of its powerhouses are in the level 5 slots, you could leverage like literally any level 6 top end you want. Whether it's actually going to be good is to be determined because I've seen some people mess around with the idea of some aces. I've seen the more common one is the Gaiamon. The less common one is like what I said, go in engine, in archetype, run Siriusmon. So there's a couple of different like small tweaks and changes you could do to it, but Heroes isn't a terrible budget deck. It just unfortunately has some really hyper polarizing matchups. Because like the weird thing is, I was originally making this as a script for a dedicated video on its own, but the one thing that I realized is like, okay, look at heroes and then look at cross hearts and look at adventures, and they all have relatively similar strengths and weaknesses. Where it's just like, oh, any tamer hate that could just hose on, like any deck that has any resemblance of tamer hate, and those decks just completely fall apart at the seams, is like absolutely hilarious to me that they have a lot of commonality to them, even though they play a little tiny bit differently from one another. So that was a fun observation that I made, and that's partially why it kept me from making that type of video, because I was listing, oh, here's the pros, here's the cons, here's the price tag, and I was just like, I got into those three decks more specifically, and I was just like, they have all the same pros and cons, like all literally all the same. Does my deck fold to Tamer Hate? Yes. Does my deck fold if I can't aggress? Yes. Does my deck die to aces? Yes. Like it's so funny that they have a lot of similar DNA into them. I mean, maybe less so dying to aces, but just heavy tamer based decks, which I guess is like where the meta was naturally shifting towards, was like, oh, tamers are borderline god tier, so the more of them you run and the more they do for you, the better they are.
Yeah, which is why we probably see every now and then Destromon, or not Destromon, Galactimon kind of pop up in the top results every now and then, because of the amount of decks that are kind of more tamer focused, or even like decks like the Viamon that can remove the tamers being like popping up every now and then like they can.
Yeah, it honestly shocks me that more people aren't playing like Hexablaumon and Imperial, because Imperial can sometimes at least bare minimum stun the tamers, but like with Hexablaumon, the deck actually just gets a way to straight up remove it. It's like Hexablaumon is so important of a card for Plu. It's like really, one, toxic, and two, sad, because the toxicity part comes from the fact that he thrives in more DNA heavy decks, where it's just like I could DNA on my level 5s more specifically, or like just giant stack building decks, so like uh X antibody style decks, or the Galaxy Loop, where I'm just gonna put one under, de-digivolve, then re-digivolve for essentially nothing, then digivolve up, then do that loop again. So essentially, you're building two stacks actively, in one. So like Hexablaumon's a very hyper specific card, but it's an insanely good card. But one of the other budget friendly decks I was looking at was Seedramon. So like Seedramon is using a like blue engine, and like it's using a blue Seedramon engine, and like yes, you could run the promo Seedramon, but a lot of the good variants don't. So you actually just don't even need that card. But if you wanted to make the deck budget friendly, you just don't include Gallimon X Antibody, you don't include Hexablaumon, and you just hyper focus on Metal Seedramon and Giga Seedramon. And like that shifts the deck a little bit to be more OTK focused, because then you could also run Blitz Omni from like BT5 instead of running Omnimon X Antibody from BT20. But the rest of the deck is like fairly cheap. It doesn't need a whole lot of Davises or Cool Boys. You could use them, but that's literally the job of like the mental trainings and whatnot. You could technically run the old Protoform, because the deck cares about digivolving mid-attack rather than saving the tempo, because again, if you're leveraging all of the other options, the tempo doesn't, it's not really that big of a deal saving on tempo from Protoform. And I'm not saying like the old X antibodies are like super cheap, or the old Cool Boy is super cheap. There's those, that's going to be the majority of the bulk of the price of the deck, but usually that's how these budget decks work, is one specific card outside of your generic staples are going to be costing a good chunk of the money, and then the rest of it is basically dirt cheap. So that's the
Yeah, no, because
common trend that I noticed.
yeah, because like the fact that, as you said, like the only promo really Seadramon needs to run is like the trainings, but trainings has kind of had the reprints and everything to make them more accessible and cheaper. So it's like not as bad to pay for versus something like my example of Galacticmon having the $30 promos that are like kind of more out of budget for that.
Right. I mean, like, so in part of the script, like when I was actually scripting this video out before, I just said, fuck it, we'll just do it as a podcast episode instead. Um, Part of that, like, script was not including the price of these staples because you're going to have to get them no matter what, whether you are a budget player or not. Like, unfortunately, Digimon has integrated these to demand their play, and I hate Digimon for doing that. I understand why they started doing that, but then it got to an unhealthy degree, and now we're just kind of stuck with the consequences, which is just reduced interest in deck building because we're forced to run these cards. Otherwise, we're fundamentally moving slower than the opponent or giving up much more to the opponent so that way they can interact with us and then blow us out even easier because we gave them something to interact with. So it's just like, yeah, that's partially why these cards are needed. And thankfully they did get reprinted, but they still need more active reprints because I think they're slowly going to creep back up in price if we don't get constant reprints on them, which is what Bandai really needs to be doing. So, like, yeah, the staples you're forced to get no matter what. I'm just scrolling to see what other fun decks I would consider as budget that actually did manage to make a top in BT21. Because I really don't feel like talking about like the decks that didn't do anything this format. So again, I'll just pick on the family decks. Birds fake did it.
Okay.
So what I mean by fake did it is Birds is basically just Megidramon in disguise. So they're using all of the broken Megidramon low-end stuff to be able to go into Phoenix X, and then Phoenix X is going to let you use all of your on-deletes, which Megidramon, spoiler, has a lot of really good on-deletes that Phoenix X now can take advantage of and trigger. So, yeah, like, Phoenixmon is basically just fake Megidramon. It is a more budget-friendly version because you don't need the Gallant-specific pieces as much, but
what about the hybrids deck? The Ancient Garurumon, Ancient Greymon, or even the Purple Hybrid?
Purple Hybrid is still good. Again, this comes down to like one card being the bulk of the price, and like the majority of the price of the deck is going to be tied up in Ukomons, and then your Gallantmons because they have to run the Gallantmon as an actual game finisher. So like those are going to be your two big expenses. I don't actually know how much Dusk and Duskmon is at this point. Let me check that up real quick. Duskmon. So Duskmon's about $3 a card right now, so that's not terrible. You could probably build an iteration without the Gallants. It's just you're playing a worse deck for it. But the Ukos you're forced to get. Ukos is like borderline almost staple territory. And like this is kind of like where if you're running a deck that relies on Ukomon, like Shine Greymon as an example, because not to get too much into a side, I played Shine at locals and I got my ass absolutely blasted. It was the most unfun experience I've ever had playing a fundamentally worse and slower OTK deck that also doesn't have good control elements when it tries to do its own thing. Like, it baffles me that Shine even managed to top, but again, it didn't top a big event. It topped more of the mid to smaller events, so it just needed to not see any of its bad matchups and get lucky. But the best resulting Shine deck was leveraging Ukomon, but like if I'm playing Ukomon in a deck, I'd rather just play Ukomon in an actually better deck that deserves the card. So that's my Ukomon rant. But like, purple hybrids is fine. I think the ancient decks are a little bit more expensive. And they haven't had that much competitive success compared to purple hybrids. But those are still passable.
Yeah, because like I know Ancient Garurumon was making somewhat of a comeback back in BT20. I don't know if it has
He
so to say in 21.
he tried and then it died out because we realized that it's just, again, Megidramon, if you're going to be running a hyper aggressive deck, Megidramon just does it better because you're still losing to the same weaknesses that you have. Like these aggro slash OTK decks all have generally the same weaknesses. It's just obviously one deck is superior than the other because if you look at the play patterns of like Ancient Greymon as an example, what does it do? Goes up into a mega out of nowhere, does some security checks, deletes Digimon, goes away, resets. What does Megidramon do? Moves out of raising, so goes up into a mega, essentially out of nowhere, does a whole bunch of checks, resets, and does more checks. Like, they're fulfilling the same exact gameplay pattern, which is why a lot of like red and blue hybrid players drop their respective decks, and same thing with purple, is because Megidramon does the exact same thing. Like literally the exact same thing, but better, because it actually can kill in its big combo turn where these hybrid decks can't.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, but I mean, they are relatively cheap and they're pretty decent decks. I think obviously like with the ancients, outside of Ukomon again being like a super pivotal card, for any hybrid based deck, the ancients is probably gonna be your next most expensive card, and they're probably like in that $3 to $10 range, and then maybe the Takuya Koji Duo Tamer might be expensive, maybe. And then I know some of the other like off-based red hybrids like Kazemon and Kuma also are like slowly creeping up because they're cheap. And the deck did get a promo to be able to try to give it new playstyles. So it's not a terrible budget deck. Like it's competent. I'll say it's at least competent. Like if you bring it to an event, people aren't going to be scratching their head and be like, "Why are you playing that?" They'll be like, "Oh, you enjoy hybrids." Which again, going back to like what I was saying earlier, it's just like, "Oh, more tamer heavy focused decks." And that it was just kind of funny to me. Like there's a very interesting dynamic for the meta where it's like this is another just casual observation. You look at like the top four decks, ancient or you look at the top four decks, and that is Sukuyamon, Royal Knights, Imperial, and Megidra. Again, not in any specific order. And the majority of those decks, while it's nice when they have their tamer, they're not solely reliant on their tamer in order for the deck to function and be as broken as it is. Like, there's plenty of games where I'm playing Imperial and I don't have my tamer and I still could just very easily win the game. Same thing with, like, Megidramon. It doesn't play its tamer. Or it doesn't even have a tamer sometimes if you're not running the analog youth. So, like, again, while tamers are great, being too hyper reliant on them is what leads to decks like Galactimon just absolutely eating them alive. And I think like that's what pushed them out of the meta to begin with. So that's
Yeah.
just more casual observations. I'm not saying like you shouldn't play tamer heavy decks, because a lot of these budget decks that we've been talking about have been more tamer heavy. It's just there's a very particular reason as far as what's actually separating them from being better in a competitive spectrum.
Yeah. I've looked up the Eggman events because I thought there was a deck I was missing. So this deck hasn't really came up since the beginning. But how do you feel about Hunters? Because for the most part, like Hunters is a budget deck. It's like mostly commons and rares. The only SR you're paying for is the BT12 Arrestor Dramon. But other than that, that's really the only SR. Well, and the
And quartz.
Cigaru, but he's like a 90 cent. Not the first. Was this first place?
I don't know. I know
Third place actually
sometimes.
wasn't running a quartz.
Yeah, I know sometimes they run quartz, but most of the time it's not in a high quantity. It's like maybe 1 to 2 quarts at most.
Yeah.
Um,
So it's like I don't know if you would consider it meta since it hasn't been popping up since the beginning, but I mean, I
you
don't know if
know,
maybe it's just because people just aren't interested.
so part of it is again like you look at what Hunters is doing versus Heroes, and you are just better off most of the time playing Heroes. Like that's the sad truth of it is Heroes is doing exactly what Hunters wants to do, just more consistently. Because Heroes doesn't or not Heroes, Hunters doesn't have as great of a consistency engine as Heroes does. So, like, you're still leveraging a lot of similar pieces and a lot of similar play styles. It's just with Heroes, you don't have, like, the, like, cute Digicrosses every now and then to be able to, like, hard play Digimon and do plays out of nowhere, but, like, it takes a lot more for or hunters to be able to get those setups to actually have good payouts rather than Heroes just I could sometimes digivolve for free into hyper oppressive level 5 Digimon that are arguably more impactful than Superior Mode. Like, Superior Mode's great and all, but he's kind of a one and done type of a card, which is unfortunate. So, also, like, DP Wars is a huge thing, and Hunters sometimes, depending on what stack you built, will not actually be able to hit the DP numbers it needs to, where Heroes will 100% hit the DP threshold it needs to. So,
Okay, that's
like,
fair.
yeah, so that's probably why we haven't seen a lot of Hunters recently, is because everyone who was on Hunters probably just realized Heroes is doing the same thing but better. And, like, that's the unfortunate reality of what I was alluding to before. It's just like, you could play Hunters. Nobody's going to fault you for playing Hunters. But if you're already playing Hunters, you're already using a good portion of Heroes, so you might as well just build Heroes. For, like, literally no extra cost either, which is the funny part. So, but yeah, I'm just scrolling through Eggman events, also looking for some other cute decks. One of the like a deck that's probably overlooked. Speaking of Tamer hate, is Dexdoru Goramon. So like, yes, it had one topping, and it wasn't even like a top four or whatever. It was I think like it got seventh place in the event that it was played in. But like the fact that that should still be a relatively budget friendly deck, at least like if you're running the purple engine, because Lugamon wasn't up, he was creeping up there in price, but ever since the Lugamon ban, he shot way down. So he's like maybe a $2-3 card at this point. And if that's arguably one of the most expensive cards in the entire deck, sure, like it's a pretty, it could be a pretty effective budget deck. I'm seeing if there's anything else that would be like really up there. Analog Youth, that's about it in terms of like hyper expensive cards
That's a
outside of
staple of
staples.
anything.
Yeah, that fits more into like the Ukomon levels of staple, where it's not a staple for every deck, but it's not a bad card just to have anyway. So yeah, like it's another hyper budget friendly deck that actually has some decent stuff to it. You don't have to run the Shinegram on Rune mode if you really don't want to. Like that'll save you a lot of money. But it does
Yeah,
leverage
because
memory boosts and trainings, and you could use scrambles, and like its key boss monsters aren't super expensive. The tamers outside of analog are not expensive at all. And then Lugamon's like the only other card that could be expensive, which right now it's not.
Yeah, because like it doesn't even promo Dorgormon that
No,
came
it doesn't.
out
It doesn't need
literally
the
in World
promo.
Merge.
Yeah, the deck doesn't even need the promo either because the promo's not helping because it doesn't have any tamer removal. And like that's the big thing on why you're running the BT16 one is because the tamer removal is incredibly important. So like if you do want like a more control-esque style deck that has the ability to remove tamers, that's potentially one you could think about looking into. Anything else that actually had good competitive success? Because I gotta scrub through Eggman events and like see what numbers the meta has. Um, I think if you wanted to, you could even consider playing Lord Nightmon, just like pure Lord Nightmon. I don't recommend it. I think like what really is pushing Purple Dogs over the edge is literally Leviamon and Leviamon X. But that's not terrible if that's like also the majority of where the price of your deck is gonna go, considering like they don't have that much attention on them, so they shouldn't be horrible. I'm hoping saying that like I
Yeah,
know the
because like
price.
Leviamon is like a $10 card in himself. I don't know what the X anybody is off the top of my head, but I mean they are also running the protoforms, and last I checked, they were $30 a piece.
Oh yeah, that's probably the big thing on what keeps it out. Um, of like
At that point, like, could you argue that protoform is a staple card though? Because like at some point, like whatever deck you're playing, it's gonna have like a there's like a lot
no.
of X antibody forms, so that card could be fluctuated with a lot of decks, so to say.
So the big thing on why Levia X is only $5 as of right now. But the big thing when it comes to protoform is like, yes, it is in staple territory, but by that logic, you could say the same thing for medieval Gallantmon. And am I telling people to go out and buy medieval Gallantmons? No, that's not the point of this. The point of this is to tell them, like, you don't need this because this deck doesn't require it. So, like, you technically could throw protoform in any X antibody deck, or you could just not play X antibody decks. That is a viable option, and it's awful to say. Like I hate saying it. It's just like, oh, I don't want to buy protoform, and the OG X antibody doesn't exactly fit with the deck. What do I do? The honest answer is just pick a different deck. Um, But like if you were building that deck and you wanted to be a little bit more budget conscientious, like you get the protoforms, you get your staples, and then you just don't play Leviamons, and you probably would be forced to lean a little bit more into either Lilith X
Fortnite.
or Lord Knight X because they all use the same, literally the same cards. Although I think Lilith X is actually a little bit more expensive than what I want to admit to.
I can't imagine like the only thing that would make cause it to be expensive is waifu tax, I guess.
Yeah, so Lilithmon is just a shy less expensive than Levia. And by that, I mean the X antibody is the exact same price, but the good base is almost the exact same price. It's literally a $2 difference. Um, and then I'm just looking up
I think
Lord
you're
Knight.
looking at the EX6 one, correct?
Yeah, the good one. Where Lord
Okay.
Nightmon is a lot cheaper because you have the rare that's like $1.50, and you also have the X, which is also like $1.50. So, like, if you
Just
wanted
out of
to,
curiosity,
yeah, if you wanted to justify getting the proto form for the Purple Dog engine, then Lord Nightmon X would be a cheaper one, even though it's probably not as efficient as what we want to admit, because it really hasn't been putting out results in a while.
yeah, like this is kind of a side thing, but just out of curiosity, do you really think that the Lilithmon from EX or BT1 or 2/1.5, whatever it is, do you not think that one might still be good? Because I mean, it does have a pretty darn good effect of getting like a zero cost option card back to your hand, so you could get the oh god, why am I drawing a blank
The
on
the
what the
problem the problem with the
Jack's
old
raid?
the problem with the old Lilithmon is one, Jack rate is limited. So that immediately makes the best card to use her with less viable. So she's now less viable because you're not running the most broken card with her. And two, if you don't see the X, she literally is fundamentally doing absolutely nothing. And that's part of the problem. Like, that's why a lot of people are saying, like, EX6 is the best base, is because she can stand on her own 2 feet. She is an independent Digimon who ain't need no tamer. Um, and, like, that's what makes her strong, is the fact that if you
Okay,
have the X, cool. If you don't have the X, also cool. Like, she just works. So you could technically reduce the price of the deck by playing a lesser version of her, but then you're relying heavier on the X to do all of the heavy lifting. So it's like with Examon. So like there's not a whole lot of budget decks left to talk about. I think like Examon's a pretty okay one to talk about because the majority of the deck is really cheap outside of like Davis, Wistoria, Memory Boost, and the OG Examon from EX3, which you arguably don't even need because you could just leverage Examon X, like Examon X and Examon Ace as like the two main Examons, and you could build the deck to be focused more on that. It's just my only issue, and this comes to like being scarred by purple hybrids. Is like if you go up against purple hybrids, um, counter DNA does not work if they change one of the Digimon you're trying to DNA with to the wrong color. Because not only does so like this goes to how bad Blast DNA actually is as a mechanic, because you have to follow the same rules as DNA. You're just adding name restrictions on top of that. It's awful. It is a terrible mechanic. But it only applies to literally one matchup, so it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, so like Examon's a pretty cute deck that you could build on a decent budget. Um, I like the decks in secret. Don't let anyone know I actually like it. And then
I was gonna say that's probably not. You probably shouldn't say it on the mic then, in front of like hundreds of viewers or listeners.
that's fine. We all have our pet decks. Like I also like Garurumon, even though I know Garurumon is just a worse OTK deck. So it's just like I would love to go back to play Garurumon, but I'm literally just better off playing a different OTK deck. Oh, speaking of like old OTK decks, I know it hasn't really put up any results this format, but honestly, if you really stop and think about it, Mirage is still a viable deck. Like Mirage is still good. Like if people can win with Shine, people can win with Mirage. And Mirage you don't even have to build to the Mirage OTK stuff. You could just play generic blue top end because the Mirage engine is just that insane still. It actually baffles my mind on why nobody's like realistically using it. That engine is so good. Like it's just as good as the purple dog engine and people are using purple dogs more than blue dogs. I think like maybe it's because a lot of people are more high on the Seedramon engine because it's newer. And it
Yeah,
works
but I
better
don't
with
think
X.
Siegemon's better than Mirage.
It's not. I would honestly play. So I guess the big difference, they have their own sets of strikes and differences. Like I think the big difference is with the Seedramon stuff, you could leverage X antibody cards, which gives you arguably a little bit deeper of a card pool. So like that lets you use Gallantmon X antibody as an example. So like that's the big appeal to using the Seedramon engine is because of a card like um, Gallantmon X. Or if you really wanted to be cute and cheeky and you're spending that kind of money, you could even just use it in what's its face? Magnamon X. Like BT16 Magnamon X run the old X antibody option, so that way they can't get rid of it out of the sources, so it'll always have its effect. And then you just have some insanely broken abilities that you could stack with that card. Like, it's a thing you could do. That's all I'm pointing out. But yeah, so I think we covered pretty much the wide variety of like decks that would be considered budget. Like obviously mileage is going to vary when it comes to what your personal budget is and what you actually want to play in terms of play style. But just know that the majority of the decks that we've been recommending that are more budget friendly are not like tier 1 decks. They're barely tier 2 decks. Um Oh, and I guess like the big honorable mention to kind of round this whole discussion out, um, I would probably say Liberator. Like any Liberator deck is actually decent to like get into. Even though some of them had more competitive success than others. Um, so like I think the most competitive ones literally was what Dinomon, Medusamon, and Zephica. Are those like the best 3 Liberator decks?
I mean, I don't know if you want to define uh, Galactic as Liberator, so to say, but
I don't, because he didn't start off as Liberator.
okay. Then yeah, I guess those three would be the best one. Obviously until EX9 comes out, then you could definitely argue Puppet is definitely way up there and probably higher than Medusamon.
Yeah, but Puppet, because you need the EX7 Sendril and ideally the promo Orisa, that takes it way out of budget territory. But like the
Fair
majority of the
enough.
rest of the Liberator decks are relatively budget friendly. So like Royal Base isn't terrible. Um, Ice and Snow has its issues, but like again, it's serviceable, it's passable. Um, Technically, it's not Liberator, but Apps is like on that same spectrum of like serviceable and passable and not like hyper expensive. Zephica, you don't have to play the Medieval Gallant and you also don't have to play EX7 Zephica. You could just play starter deck and Ace, and the majority of that deck should be cheap enough. Dinomon is the most expensive card in Dinomon outside of Tyranno X Antibody. So like yeah, those
Yeah.
aren't terrible decks to want to like invest in and play. Like honestly, I think like maybe Dinomon would be better in this format than people give him credit for. I think it's maybe because Dinomon players are scarred against Volder Arm, that maybe is why they don't want to play him. Because Volder Arm just says, yeah, so you're on play from your fortitude just literally means nothing. So that's probably pretty scarring for them. But yeah, Liberator decks, the vast majority of them I think are pretty cheap and pretty decent. Like honestly, Liberator just felt like as a whole it wanted to be a really like I think Digimon should have just leaned heavier into having that be like a soft slash hard reboot of the game.
Yeah,
Like
because it
that's the
definitely
power level I feel like they want to design around, and then every set they have just one deck that's like absolutely butt stupid and power spikes things.
yeah, because like you can even tell like how they want the gameplay to be and everything. I mean, obviously they like how they design intended is definitely different from what people actually end up playing. But like even if you just look at the comics and everything, like there's a lot more back and forth with the Liberator deck, so to say. Like they only use the Liberator decks, and they are saying like, hey, there's a lot more back and forth with Liberators versus if you throw anything else outside of it. And when they do, like take Lucamon for example, like in the webcomics they had like back and forth of Lucamon versus Tyrannomon and everything.
Yeah, like there's It's definitely a very interesting power dynamic that Bandai very clearly doesn't know how to balance and manage as well as they like to think that they do. Um, but yeah, so I think like just Liberator in general is good. Good investment. Shouldn't cost an arm and a leg. Not going to be like the best deck, but then again, none of the decks we were talking about outside of what I've already stated the top 5 decks are actually going to like give you the tops super consistently or are topping super consistently. So, but that's the cool thing is like these tier 2 decks against other tier 2 decks from my experience are actually like really fun. Or I guess like it's not even tier 2. Most of the time these are like tier 2.5 or tier 3 decks. If we're really being honest. Um, but I think like these decks are fine. They're fun to play against each other. They're interesting.
Yeah, because one of my locals I was playing Galacticmon. I actually went up against Safagamon deck, and it did honestly feel like kind of BT13 a little bit back then when I was playing against that.
Yeah, like when I was playing like 2 weeks ago, apps into Medusa, like he was deleting my Digimon, I was deleting his Digimon. There was good interactions and back and forth, and like that's what I think good healthy Digimon is. Versus what we currently have now, but that's beside the point. The whole point of this was to highlight some decks that have done well that should be relatively budget friendly and should be able to get anyone to be able to play the game and still be able to have fun at it because like building something like any of the family decks and then just getting your ass blasted, it's all the time, it's not a good feeling or experience. Like when I was playing Shine, like I know some people are doing okay with Shine, but like when I was playing Shine against some of the more top tier meta decks, that was the most miserable experience I have like ever came across in my like current history with the Digimon card game. It was awful. Like absolutely awful. I was having zero fun. I wasn't able to play the game. Like it made me question why I even bothered shuffling up and sitting down. Like that's the power disparity between like good decks and bad decks. Or like good decks and okay decks, I'll say. It's not like my Shine deck was poorly put together or didn't function. It was just the opponent I couldn't interact with and didn't let my deck function. So it wasn't fun. But it should have been better if I was playing against like other decks of that same caliber. And I think like the experience definitely would have been very night and day. So, um, anything else to wrap and round out the podcast, Jay Stewart?
The only thing I could think of is we now officially have a release date for the Time Stranger game being October 3rd, which is 2 weeks before Pokemon. So that's kind of interesting in itself right there. And they kind of have reviewed like a bunch of different bundles and everything. Like there's a standard version, there's like a deluxe, ultimate, and collector's edition. Unfortunately, as of right now, collector's edition is kind of sold out. But like the ultimate and deluxe are pretty good in themselves as well. Especially when you consider like all the different stuff. There's like talks of already like literally from based on the ultimate edition, which is like $120. Like they already have like 3 DLCs planned, and each DLC is going to have 5 brand new Digimon that are going to come out in each DLC. So like that's already pretty cool in itself right there. That there's
Yeah,
already talk of so much add-in for the game, and it's not even out yet.
Yeah, I mean, Bandai's pretty okay when it comes to their video game department versus their TCG department. I will definitely say that. I think like that's more Namco's doing than Bandai's doing, but I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here. Um, but yeah, we with some of those other editions, we do get a new promo card. We don't know when and where this card's going to get reprinted, if it's going to get reprinted at all. Essentially, it's a level 4 yellow vaccine Digimon that has the Time Strangers trait. So that's new and interesting. So maybe that'll lead into something in future sets, most likely. And then the other big thing is it just has good keywords. It's blocker and barrier native to it, and the inheritable is barrier. So not terrible. What I would have liked to see is like the inheritable be blocker and barrier. Like have two inheritables off of one card. I think that would have been pretty spicy. But it is what it is.
I think that depends. I do think that kind of depends if it's like trait specifically locked, like, oh, it can only have this inheritable if it's on like a Time Stranger trait, then yes, it's fine. But making it generic, that might be pushing it, in my opinion.
I mean, it is a promo, and Digimon, as we know, does have promo problems, so it very easily could be pushing it. Like, I don't know. I think the card as is fine. It doesn't really have a home yet. It might not have a home. Actually, maybe it does have a home in Sakuyamon because that's what they're using Starmon for. So maybe they just replace Starmon with this. But then again, Starmon has an on-play and lower play cost. And Starmon's on-play at least pops like floodgates. So maybe they actually don't. But Starmon's also data, but then again, the deck doesn't care about trait, whether it's data or vaccine or not. So, I don't know. I'm spinning my wheels here. I think the card's fine.
I mean, I think they did already confirm that BT23 is going to be a Time Stranger set. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong on that, but
I mean, it would make sense if it is, because we have 22 being Cyber Sleuth. We have 22 is being Cyber Sleuth. 23 is 23 is going to be the second one, the second game. Hacker's Memory.
24. That's the one I meant.
Yeah, so 24. If it is Time Strangers, that's not going to be surprising at all. What really is surprising is the fact that we are getting a dedicated Time Stranger set before Survive. Because I think Survive, like if that had a dedicated set to it, I think that would be pretty fun. Because there was a lot of good Digimon in Survive. But I'm just a Survive fan. Yeah, I'm just a Survive fan, living on some massive copium. We're getting into the video game era of the Digimon TCG versus the anime era. So we're bound to get Survive stuff eventually. Like, more than just the garbage promos that we got. There were one of them was playable. Okay, maybe two of them were playable. So
two, I think you're pushing it, but yeah.
Well, because, like, I know the Dracmon, that was like, the only hyper-real playable card. And then I think, like, at least maybe one other... Yeah, one other saw some experimental play. I don't remember which one. But anyway, I digress. It'll be interesting to see what we're getting in the future. And speaking of future, just to kind of round things out, we do know the last secret rare. It is Chimera, and Chimera looks incredibly mid. So there's our take on that. Or at least there's my take on that.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel the same. I mean, the only thing it really has going for it is the fact that it has the assembly thing of being able to, what's the word I'm looking for here? Use cards from trash, so that could be good with Millenniumon, but that's about it.
Yeah, that seems like a stretch. So it just is what it is. And we're gonna be looking forward to seeing more spoilers in the future when it comes to BT22, because that's going to be a very hot set. Like, this next set looks hot for one specific deck that's named as Omnimon, and then everything else is borderline garbage, at least from the outlook of it. Obviously, the reality could shape up to be something different, but its outlook does not look super great as a set. And we're just going to be looking forward to BT22 a little bit more. So, yeah. I think we're good here. So, unless you have any extra final statements.
No, I think that is going to be it.
All right.
I mean, just excited for Time Stranger, so.
Yeah, at this point, I'm really just holding out. Like, I'm glad this is at the end. I'm literally just holding out for the app because we should be getting app news in July, September area. We should be getting more information on that because of Anime Expo. And they said that they were going to talk about it then. But outside of that,
When is the Anime Expo?
I have no idea. You think I pay attention to that?
Well, I don't, but not necessarily. It's just I
Here,
remember
I'll
actually
I'll
seeing on
Google
Reddit there
it.
was like a Bandai card. Yeah, because I just remember seeing on Reddit that there's like apparently some sort of Bandai card game news announcement scheduled for this month, I guess. So
July 6th.
according to Reddit, at least.
Yeah, Anime Expo is
Huh.
July 6th. So we're gonna get some new information then, and it'll be interesting. But like, at this point, that's just the mobile app is the only thing that's realistically keeping me in, as deep as I am. Otherwise, I probably would be slowly exiting, because I have not enjoyed the game, and I think it's only killing itself slowly. Um, I probably would transition to be more of a collector rather than like an actual player, because everything Bandai has done recently has given me zero hope and confidence, and at least a free mobile app that lets me play Digimon similar to Pokemon Pocket, where it's just very easy to jump into. Games are quick and snappy. I think that sounds really fun. Digimon Online's been kind of filling that void, but like it's not official, so it has like some off vibes about it. I don't know. I also it's on my computer versus my phone, and I think that makes a huge difference because I'm on my phone more than I am on my computer. But yeah, so I'm super excited to hear any extra news on the mobile app because that's going to be basically, in my perspective, the future of Digimon and like how I engage with the game in a more meaningful capacity. So I'm trying and I'm holding out until then, still keeping the status quo for now. But yeah, so I think that's a good place to stop for this episode. Thank you everyone for making it all the way to the end, if you even did. It means the absolute worlds to us that you actually sat through and listened to two guys ramble and talk on the internet for this long. So thank you all again, and we hope to see you all in the next episode. Later.